Hey, Melissa.
Hey, Amy.
So we just interviewed Jennifer Hasser of Kendore Learning. So let's talk a little bit about who she is.
Well, Jennifer Hasser is a nationally recognized dyslexia advocate. She's an author and a trainer in the field of reading. She actually has a child of her own who has dyslexia, so she knows the firsthand challenges people with dyslexia and learning difficulties face and has devoted her life to leveling the playing field. She did receive some education from a bunch of different universities. She's a smart cookie. And currently she is the executive director of Kendore Learning and Syllables Learning Center. And she uses her expertise to guide reading remediation and enrichment in both one-on-one and classroom settings.
So Jennifer has trained more than 1,000 teachers in the Kendore Smart curriculum and has helped thousands of students acquire language skills. She is a regular presenter at reading and dyslexia conferences like IDA, because we saw her there, and serves as an educational consultant to a number of Atlanta area schools. And in addition to her free time, right, she designs, develops, and implements RTI plans for public schools.
She had a lot of great information she shared with us.
She sure did. She sure did. So let's go to the episode right now.
Hi.
Bye. Hi, this is Amy.
And Melissa. We are a couple of retired Texas teachers who are CALTs, Certified Academic Language Therapists. We started our own businesses, and now we have a podcast called
The Dyslexia Duo. So join us for our informative podcast, where we'll delve into dyslexia, covering the topics that affect parents, therapists, teachers, practitioners, and anyone who wants to learn more. We'll guide you through everything you need to know, from the first signs to the intricacies of dyslexia curriculum placement and beyond.
This season, we will cover the referral process, what to expect when your child or student is dyslexic, the generational impacts of dyslexia, and how to support those affected.
Come join us.
Hey, Amy.
So today we have a very, very special guest. They're all very, very special guests, but Jennifer is very, very special. We've met up a few different times. So I would love for Jennifer to come on now and introduce herself and tell our audience of parents and teachers and therapists and decision makers a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Great. Well, first, I'd like to say thank you for having me. I appreciate it. My name is Jennifer Hasser. I have been a teacher in the field of education, I guess, for over 30 years. So quite a while. And my background started accidentally, as a lot of times I hear that same story, because none of us are really taught these things in school. But I wanted to teach high school social studies. And I loved geography and civics and all, history and all those things. And when I was interviewing, they didn't have any jobs. And so they offered me high school behavior disorders and learning disabilities in Atlanta. And I was like, I don't know anything about that, but I'll work hard. They'll love me. They'll offer me a social studies job next year. Right. So I decided to take it. And I had kids with serious behavior issues and serious learning issues and zero training. Of course, I was really young and thought, I can do this. I know I went to school, which is what a lot of people think. I went to school, I could be a teacher, as if it were that easy. So I definitely said things along those lines and found out that my students didn't know how to read. And I thought, why am I trying to teach them 11th grade literature that they can't read, that they can't write about, that they don't understand, when that's not going to help them out in the real world if they can't read? So my principal said, when I went to him, I said, can I teach reading? And he said, sure. What he said really was, as long as they don't leave the room, he didn't really care what I did, which is not the nicest thing to say, right. But also the reality was, when my kids left the room, bad things happened. So they were, they had behavior issues. They weren't successful. They acted out. But I was really appreciative for the freedom to be able to do that, and him not saying, they need to know, this work by William Cullen Bryant, and because that's going to help them get a job. It just wasn't. And so I learned in the first 5 minutes of teaching reading that I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. So my very first thing I said was, okay, you guys just guess at words. We're going to start sounding them out. And the word agenda was on the board because our agenda was there. And I said, like A says ah, like agenda. And G says g, like agenda. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening?
This whole word's not working out for me.
Right. And all my kids with behavior issues, they're just like anywhere from like 15 to 19, leaning back in their chairs going, told you it was hard. I mean, they literally called me on the carpet and I said, oh my gosh, how do I know how to read? They're like, we don't know. And kind of started me on my journey because I realized I didn't know how I learned. I didn't know why they couldn't read. And I didn't know how to get the information from my brain into their brain.
Yeah.
And so we just kind of decided we would tackle it together. And while I was teaching high school, I learned the most about our language because they don't let you get by with anything.
Yeah.
Like I tried to teach two vowels go walking. First one does the talking because that's the only thing I knew.
Yeah.
And my, high school kids, like, they don't care. They're like, well, what about OO? What about OI? What about, I'm like, I don't know. And so it was very humbling. Many, many years later, when I started working with K through 8, the little kids, they just don't challenge you like that. They think you're the smartest, prettiest, nicest, person they've ever met, which was very good for my ego, but probably wouldn't have taught me as much about the language because I just had a room full of hecklers. It was just nonstop heckling.
Yeah.
And it made me more determined to find the answers for them. And over time, I got to be pretty good at it. Initially, I feel really bad. Hopefully it made some difference in their lives, but I did work very, very hard doing probably a terrible job, but I was trying. And then over time, my kids started to get out of the special ed program. Their behaviors improved so dramatically. And everyone wanted to know what I was doing. Like I had this magic sticker chart or treasure box, or these are virtually adults, they're 16, 17, 18 years old. The only thing that really I've seen in my career that motivates kids for the long term is success. If they're not feeling successful, they do not continue trying. They shut down. And I can, motivate them with some little things, but it's not going to last for long. And especially kids with behavior disorders, if I keep having to escalate, I'd end up having to buy them a car by the end of the year. So
Yep.
Finding the, way to intrinsically motivate them was really important to me. And I think success really is an honesty, not trying to flatter them and tell them that they're doing well when they're not, but, honestly talk about their growth and their struggles and where we're headed and why we're headed that way, and being really honest and upfront with them. And they respect that. And so eventually I was asked to open a reading center, which I did. I thought, okay, I could help more kids this way, because when you teach kids with behavior, you can't have more than like 10, 12 in a room, depending on diagnoses. So I thought, wow, I could help a lot more kids at the Marcus Center in Atlanta. It's now a center for autism. But when I started there a little over 20 years ago, it was for all learning issues. And so it was collaborative with developmental pediatricians and psychologists and speech language pathologists. And that was really great for learning a lot about testing. So now I've been a diagnostician and a teacher, and now, I train teachers now. But the kids would go back to their home school and the teachers were like, what are you doing? Like, what do you mean, what am I doing? I started working with young kids, but it wasn't my background. And I assumed that all elementary school teachers knew the things that I had to figure out on my own. Because when I started, the internet was not very reliable.
Right.
It was, who knows what I don't know if you remember those days. How old you are, but you Googled cheese and you ended up with a trip to Thailand. You have no idea what was coming up. So there was no Google. I don't even know why I say Google. I know I used Google in my sentence, which wasn't even around. So, then I started the reading center. And then when the teachers came to me, they said, and this is kind of funny, they said to me, will you train us? And I was like, well, I'm sure you know everything I know. I just figured the kids' behavior was getting in the way in the class. There's too many kids in the room, things like that. Right. So when they went back, they were then doing better than the kids that were in the classroom.
Right.
And they're like, will you train us? And finally I relented because I thought they would, be disappointed. So I had the whole training catered. So I was like, at least they can have a nice lunch. I'm sure I'm not going to tell them anything new. And it just shocked me because they just didn't know. They didn't know how to say their sounds correctly. They didn't know any of the reasons for why things were happening. They didn't know how to explain things to the kids. And so then it just kind of grew from there. So the reading center, which we still have, is 24 years old, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. And we have worked with thousands and thousands of kids, like 100,000 hours of tutoring, and all over the world. So we started doing virtual when Skype started back in mid 2000s. I don't remember exactly. And then Zoom just revolutionized it once the pandemic hit and it became more of an acceptable practice. So we've been doing that for a very long time. I have an amazing staff that's been with me for really 15, 20 years. Yeah, they're awesome. And then the teacher training started. So I just said, sure. And still to this day, we really just spread through word of mouth. Like we don't have salespeople. We don't have anything like that. I probably trained somewhere between 30 and 40,000 teachers.
Wow.
At this point. It's been a long time. So it's not like it'd be great if a stadium was full, but it's not like I did one big group at a time, but just over time and it spread from word of mouth. So I really like the fact that we're kind of organic in the fact that, one teacher talks to another teacher and then that teacher comes and then they talk their team into it. And then all of a sudden the grade level is doing it. And then 3 grade levels are doing it. And then I like it because when the teachers see that it works, there's so much more buy-in because change is hard and doing something new is hard. And I really respect teachers when they're willing to go out of their comfort zone and learn something new. And I have given my cell phone number out to 40,000 teachers.
Oh my gosh.
Probably not the first 10,000 because I didn't have a cell phone, but I am just rounding up. I don't know exactly things, but I've never had to, block anyone. And when they ask me questions, they're like legitimately coming from a place of curiosity, or the kids are curious, or, but they feel like they have kind of a lifeline to not feel abandoned standing in front of the room and having to say, I don't know, which I always start off every training, talking about that because we're never going to know everything we need to know about anything in life, right? Like, what is that saying? Like, if you're 17, leave home now while you still know everything,
right?
Right. Teenagers.
Yes.
You get to my age and you're like, do I know anything at all? But, to kind of share that learning experience with your kids, I think is really important. It doesn't undervalue you.
Right.
It doesn't mean you're not a good teacher. It means you're an honest teacher.
Right.
You're saying we all have to learn these things, and there's so many words and there's so much knowledge in the world. Mm-hmm. How can I ever, hold all of that? But let's look at how we can figure these things out. And then you're giving them the tools to do this for the rest of their life, right? If they don't know, you can help them figure it out. And then, crazy enough, I end up having a daughter with dyslexia.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, how lucky am I?
Yeah.
You already have all the knowledge. Well, I mean, we're continually growing in knowledge, but you have all the information already.
I know. Like when I meet all these parents and they're struggling and they're upset and I understand, I feel like even luckier because, I have twin daughters. One is dyslexic, one is not.
Wow.
And my other daughter, the non-dyslexic daughter, has food allergies. And for years I kept saying, quit whining, you're fine. And so I have, with her, I had the struggle of learning all that and not knowing and feel terrible about She said, Mom, you're trying to kill me. And I said, no, no, I wasn't. I didn't know. Yeah. I said, but if I feed it to you tomorrow, you'll know where that's coming from.
Yep. Yep. We have a food allergy one too. And I'm like, okay, try it. I've got the EpiPen. Poised and ready to go.
Right. So I've been down, we tried so many doctors and figuring things out and all of that. So I relate to the trials and tribulations of parents trying to figure these things out. But I do feel very lucky that I, knew what I knew. People ask if I got into it because of my daughter. And it's kind of ironic because I was president of the International Dyslexia Association Georgia branch at the time she was diagnosed. And they're like, did you get into this because of your daughter? I'm like, that would have been a meteoric rise.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I was totally tracking with your experience with my experience because I just kind of fell into the position. But then I know a lot of dyslexia therapists or practitioners or even QIs who got into this because they had a child with dyslexia. Right. So your story is going to resonate with two different tracks of people, I feel strongly.
Most of us teachers are also parents and also all these different realms of that overlap. So I think this is not an issue that is just for parents of kids with dyslexia. So literacy is bigger than just dyslexia, and it's a big problem. Yeah. And our educators knowing about dyslexia, it's important for all learners, not just some learners. So to me, it's literacy. And when I first was nominated, I was asked to be on the board of the International Dyslexia Association. I'm telling you all my embarrassing stories. And I said, really? I said, I don't work with kids with dyslexia. I work with struggling readers.
Okay.
I know. Right. And that gives me a lot of empathy for, because I'd been talking to these people and we were saying all the same things. I just wasn't using that terminology.
Right.
Right. So I knew why they were struggling. I knew how they were struggling. I knew what they needed to learn. I knew but I was public school. And at the time, initially, the International Dyslexia Association was, mostly private schools for kids with dyslexia or people in private practice, not public school teachers. So there wasn't a lot of crossover in information. And I was the first public school teacher, honestly, that I know of that was on the board.
Wow.
Here, and so it's nice to see how much it's changed and how many school teachers are now actively involved and joining in with people who have the luxury of coming in with more training.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see.
Nice.
So I had a question for you. I wanted to just kind of clarify. So it sounds like you started as a behavior therapist and you did all of that work with them and figured out kind of how to go about teaching them to read. But did you also go through some more extensive training to go through dyslexia therapy type of training or anything like that?
Well, for a long, long time, I was self-taught, right? So still sometimes in high schools, people don't see the value of having someone who teaches reading. So finding training was very difficult. I went down to a local university that I won't name, and I said, I really need something. I need materials. I need, I realized, obviously, I don't know what I'm doing. And I was told to give them an interest inventory. And if I could get them interested, then they would read more. And I said, I'm interested in becoming a bikini model. I don't think that's going to cut it. The interest alone doesn't, it just logically made no sense to me that just interest would, I said, but they can't read. And that was a disconnect for her. And she was a professor. And from someone who had zero training in reading, that just didn't make sense. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was just a little funny analogy. And mm-hmm. she'd be like, oh, well, you mean they really can't read? But she did not. She doubled down and gave me an interest inventory. And I said, well, I'd be interested to see if they can read this interest inventory. So then, yes, I went back. I realized that I really liked the kids that struggled. And so I was offered a social studies position and I turned it down. I said, no, these are my people.
Yeah.
I love these kids and especially like the bad ones because it usually comes from a place. I mean, they could have dropped out, right? These kids are still there. They want to succeed. Mm-hmm. It's just buried deep down because it's been so many years of failure. And so I really, really, I mean, I love working with all kids, and everyone deserves to read, but the ones who struggle really kind of have my heart. And so I've been through like a lot of different trainings. I had already, though, written a curriculum because I had to create my own stuff. And so Kendore, which is our training side, we have our own curriculum. And it is, went back, got a master's and did a lot more stuff, and I edit it all the time and find new things and try to make it better and more effective. But then I went through and got it accredited. I went through the process of applying for that. And so we went through MSLEC and IDA. So it's just over time, each one of these kind of builds on itself. That's why I say it's all been pretty organic. When I first was doing training, I had tons of index cards. I had the teachers cut them up and we made games. And I used to jokingly say that my program was cheap and easy. My goal is to be cheap and easy, and help give them all materials that they need to be able to be successful. Because in the public schools, you don't get as much training as you would like, right? Every person who's trained in public school will be able to tell you, they've never gotten as much time as they. But it's always like a negotiation to get, as much as you. But once you like prove yourself and it's effective, then they're usually willing to let you, have more. And so I was always kind of begging for more. But the materials, they're like, "Do you have these cards pre-made?" Then I was like, okay. So I went and printed those, and so we have an online store and we sell, our card games and materials to people who use all different programs because, the content is the same. It just may be a slightly different order or, that kind of thing as far as scope and sequence. But so, now I kind of have the three things. Syllables is the name of the learning center. My last name is Hasser. So it's H-A, two S's like Sam, E-R. And it means to hate in German.
Oh no.
So the Hasser reading system was out. The Hasser reading center was out. I mean, I got married young. I didn't know about etymology at the time. I didn't even look it up. I thought, and then once it's like, well, can't call ourselves to hate reading center. No one's signing up for that. So I was having a hard time. My mom's like, why don't you just name it like phonics or syllables? And I go, syllables it is. And that's how I came up with the name. So nothing too exciting, but syllables is where we do all of our therapy and virtual teaching. And then Kendore is half of each of my daughter's middle names.
Oh.
And their middle names came from kids I taught when I taught high school. So we just kind of put that together. And because initially it was called SMART, which was Systematic Multisensory Approach to Reading Training, is what I put it together. And this is a long time ago. So there were no smartphones or smart cars or smart boards. And then when they started being invented, I'm like, I'm never going to be able to keep this name. So I switched it to Kendore. And that's why we have those two parts, and they complement each other really well, so.
That's funny. You said that you named your daughters after kids that you had taught. I use those names as an avoidance, not to. Some of the kids are like, oh, no, we're not going to name her this. We're not going to name him this. I had one of those.
Well, I don't know that I'm going to say I named them particularly after those kids, but that's where I learned of the names. So, and they were good kids. It was not like, so that's kind of where it came from.
That's awesome. I love that story. And I love the Kendore products. I have quite a few here at my center here that I use with students, and you're right. I mean, it doesn't necessarily align with a particular scope and sequence, but once we get to a certain point, I'm like, hey, I can introduce, the hard and soft G one, or I can do the Caesar pleaser once they get to Greek and Latin. I can introduce all those pieces. I love it. I remember one time we got a big order that came to the house, and my husband goes, Amy, you need to stop. And I'm sure Jennifer's going, no, Amy, keep going.
Well, it's really funny because I definitely am not liked by a lot of husbands, but the teachers, they like the stuff, and, the kids like it. And a lot of the games, the reason I designed them is because the need for repetitive practice, especially when you have a child with dyslexia, it's so important, and at, our center, we have had so many kids come in who've been tutored for years by other people. And they come in and they're looking for something a little different than whatever it was that they had. And the kids will know a lot. I'm almost like, I need to hire them. Like they can tell me so much. They know every rule. They can tell you every concept, and they can't apply it.
Yeah.
And so the amount of repetition that kids who struggle need exceeds, the norm. And it's not just like anything. I could probably be a dietitian. I know so much about dieting, but my application is poor. I just got back from a trip with my daughters and I was scared to step on the scale. I was like, those Danishes, we went to Denmark, and I'm like, and I know why they get a whole pastry named after their country, because those things are good. So, but my application is lacking, right? I could give you the knowledge, like you should eat a well-balanced meal as I'm eating my dish. So these kids, I would say, do you know how to spell E, the sound E, right? And they would tell me things like, well, E, comma, E, comma, EA, comma. They like listed it off, commas and all, which means they'd memorized it.
Yeah.
But they didn't know when, where, and why to use things. And so the games are something that they want to play, and they don't realize that in one game, they could be getting a couple hundred repetitions of the concept that they need to internalize.
Yeah.
And, just knowing how the brain works, kids are naturally competitive. They naturally do want to win and compete. So using that kind of natural drive helps them to master the information, because the games are, you have to apply the skill in order to win. So if you don't know the skill, then you can't win.
Right.
So there's kind of that internal motivation to do it. And then I get kids who, even if we're past a concept, we might review it by playing the game and seeing how automatized it is. And they can all be played at different levels. Like, if we had R controlled vowels, they could be played at a kindergarten level where it's just kind of matching, all the way up to my middle and high school kids would play them. But you'd use it more for working memory and manipulation of the R controlled vowel with like a closed syllable to help them figure those out. But so that they can kind of be dropped in, for that repetition. Because 100 different repetitions on a worksheet, that would be a whole packet.
Right.
And they'd be complaining the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the way the brain works, if you've got that motivation, then you've got positive chemicals flooding through their brain. Not, are we done yet? Are we done yet?
Right.
One of my favorite things, I have this little boy, and he was at our tutoring center, and I said, okay, well, we're done. Time to clean up. And he's like, my mom is paying for an hour. I go, sweetie, it's been an hour. He's like, really? Wow. And I thought, that's great, right? Like, obviously his mom was threatening him. Attention, I'm paying for this.
That's funny.
As mothers do. And, when they don't stare at the clock the whole time or complain and whine, like, I think that's a good thing, right?
Right.
So,
well, and sometimes I've seen with my students that they almost seem to have a fight or flight type of reaction to reading in sentences. They might be fine decoding the words and they know how to do it. They know how to blend it, all of that. But when they go and put it in a sentence, you could see their anxiety kind of increase, and they might not be an anxious person otherwise. But when they start reading, that fight or flight kind of kicks in, and then it just all falls apart. So does the game kind of help bridge that gap between reading the decodable words and putting them into sentences? Is that just what you're mentioning about the repetition? Okay.
I think that is one of the missing links that's not talked about enough, honestly, is, we have these, and we talk about, phonological awareness and phonics and fluency, but scaffolding from one thing to another, I work with a lot of schools. So, and the schools will say, well, as long as they know their sounds and 50 sight words, they're ready for first grade. And I'm like, that's not reading, that's memorization, right? So reading really is blending, and being able to get those sounds, blending them together till they can be orthographically mapped and they're easier to retrieve, right? But that means it's overlearned. And so a lot of times too much is introduced at once and not enough attention is being put on blending and making sure that they can hold that information in their short-term working memory, right? And that it's automatized before we give them sentences, right? So it's like, I mean, if I was learning to juggle, we'd start with those little handkerchiefs. No one's going to start with chainsaws, right? Like, it'd be the shortest juggling lesson ever, So, you work your way up as you slowly can get those handkerchiefs. Then we can start adding in maybe some oranges or balls or something that's not going to harm anyone when they fall, and work our way up to 3 things or 4 things. It's really the same type of thing. And oftentimes we're like, okay, I taught these concepts and I taught these 5 words, and then now they're going to be able to do that. And for prosody, when we're reading, that if you can't automatically retrieve this information, if it's not overlearned, it's going to be really labor intensive. And so bridging that gap, that automaticity helps so much, because I've had so many kids who are like, they're reading the word sat and they look at the S, they look up to the ceiling where all answers are written.
Yeah.
They look up and they're like, and you can see what they're doing. They're being like sausage. They're thinking of another word, cutting off, flipping the sound, then saying the sound. Then they're like apple. So now they're like sausage, apple, and that is a lot of cognitive load. Right. So if we can have just sound retrieval automatized, and then we can work on blending, and we can then teach words the way that they're going to be read. And a lot of teachers don't do that either. They teach TO as 2. But in a sentence, it very rarely is going to be 2. So if a kid is labored and slow, you might say, she went to the store, right? But that's not the way that we speak, and that's not the way we read with prosody. It would be, she went to the store, to the, right? Not to the. And so there's oftentimes a disconnect between what the teacher is doing and saying and what the kid is doing and saying. And then we say, well, now read it fluently. It's like, isn't that what I just did? And you're like, now read it like me. She went to the store. And then the kid is 5, 6. They're like, it's to the store. And you want me to say to? So they might mimic it. But now we've confused the heck out of them by saying, this is the word and this is what it says. And then expecting them to say something completely different. Right. Like natural readers will make that leap. They will jump from that individual word to a totally different pronunciation in connected speech, right? Completely different pronunciation. And there's a big knowledge gap there for teachers. A lot of teachers will say things to me like, my students don't hear the middle syllable in words. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I would look at it and I'm like, they spell different, DIFRENT. And I'm like, that's what they said. Right. Because we have 3-syllable words. There's so many of them that we will elide that middle syllable and it's not there. So when they spell different, they're saying it exactly the way that we say it. So that was an excellent representation of speech, right? We have to also include morphology, because morphology is going to guide us through the real spelling. And we need to talk to kids about the difference between phonology and morphology, right? Because if we don't have the DIF, then we don't know that it's dis and it means not. If we don't have the FER in our spelling, that means to carry or bear, right? So we have, if we just have different, that's a prefix and a suffix, right? The meaning part is not even there. So if teachers don't have a broad knowledge of all of it, the phonology, the morphology, what connected speech sounds like, a lot of the linguistics that guide our spelling rules are just things that they regurgitate in isolation without really having the kids understand that it's probably the basis for the majority of spelling rules. So if they have that information, they can then apply it as new words come along when we're not around,
Right.
which is what we want, right?
Right.
I don't want to have to read with my students the rest of their life. That would be time consuming.
Yes,
Yeah.
it would. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Hi, this is Melissa with Kids First Dyslexia Services. I am excited to share with you my private practice. Kids First Dyslexia Services is a private practice that specializes in dyslexia therapy. Each one-on-one session focuses on instruction specific to your child's needs in a nurturing environment that develops self-esteem, builds confidence, and fosters a sense of accomplishment, resulting in happier kids with higher levels of achievement. We provide a professional, personalized experience, always putting the child first. We value the relationships with both our students and parents because strengthening skills and overcoming hurdles to achieve desired goals and success is a team effort. For more information, please visit www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com. That is www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com.
Hi there. This is Amy Rodenroth, owner of Discovery Dyslexia Services. So tell me if any of these situations are familiar to you. Your dyslexia teacher / therapist has suddenly retired unexpectedly, and you do not have the personnel to fill the space. Or you do not have enough trained teachers or therapists for the number of students who have qualified for dyslexia services, and you need a trained teacher or therapist quickly, like yesterday, quickly. Or you need a teacher to provide compensatory services, and you do not have anyone that can provide what's needed. Well, what do? I'm going to tell you what you can do. You can call Discovery Dyslexia Services. Discovery Dyslexia Services can help you with your various dyslexia concerns. We have multiple counts who can provide virtual small group therapy. We can also train your teachers in most dyslexia curricula, either virtually or on site. Just let us know how we can help support you. For more information, go to our website at www.discovered.com. Let me spell that for you. DYSCOVEREAD.com. I don't know, it's a funny name, but we're providing huge services for our dyslexic population. So keep in mind, Discovery Dyslexia Services, covering all your dyslexia needs. Let's return to the show. Well, I'm kind of thinking about your morphology, and I'm jumping down the list a little bit. You gave some examples of how you could introduce morphology to students when you talk about how it's said in running speech and so on. But what other resources could teachers use, not just you, because you know this stuff, but for teachers, what resources could teachers use to further support morphology?
Well, I think the first thing is making sure you really know what that means, what morphology means. So people say, well, you shouldn't start morphology till third grade. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. But what they're trying to say is Latin and Greek roots, right? Which is what we were taught when we were young. And because we think, oh, those were all big words.
Right.
But it's not the size of the word that really matters. Little kids can tell you about a Tyrannosaurus Rex or a helicopter. Like, they know big words. And they can figure those out if you give them the tools. What really, when we talk about morphology, is we need to understand that it starts before they even come to school.
Right.
Like, they're little language machines from birth. They're really just mimicking and listening and moving their mouth around until you give them a cookie. Like, when you can't understand them, they're flopping around on the floor. They're really mad at you.
Yeah.
You're like, you want this? No.
Yeah.
They just look at you like, are you not listening? But even a toddler understands the word cookies, right?
Yeah.
So if they came to you and said cookies, they would be expecting you to hand them more than one cookie,
Yeah.
right? Because they said cookies. So they understand morphology probably better at that age than adults do, because we're not that conscious about it once we get to a certain age. But they didn't say cookie, and they didn't say cake. They didn't say donut. right? Like, and they know that at the end of cookie, they added a z,
Right.
right? They didn't say, excuse me, you gave me one cookie, but if you'll notice, I had the morpheme added to the end that made it plural, and it sounds like a z and not a s, even though we write it with a s because it goes after a voice sound. So we're going to hear this. Like, they're not saying all of that, right? But their brain is naturally picking up on that, and just articulation effects, just from the fact that they're listening to speech, they're producing it. We don't say sounds in isolation, right? They're always in a continual flow of air, which is what speech is. And they already know that. So they may not know like the words plural or suffixes or base word, but they definitely can utilize all that. So as a teacher coming into kindergarten, it's so easy to just raise their awareness to we're going to be learning more of what you already know, right? As teachers, we're always told activate prior knowledge.
Yeah.
And don't do that enough, right? Like, because teachers, like, we'll do like segmentation drills and things like that. And I'll have teachers, I'll say, okay, let's say the sounds in banana. And they'll go, ah, ah, ah. I'm like, banana? Like, it's not, nah, right? Like, because they're thinking of letters and not really listening. But those little kids, that's all they're doing is listening to sounds and words, and their brain is growing at a rate that we just couldn't even really imagine. And of course, now at my age, it's shrinking, but it happens. And that is what we need to pay attention to, is that a base word like book and is a morpheme. So they are teaching morphology. You know, then they say books, then that adding the S is going to be plural or present tense, right? Like, I have 2 books, or she books a hotel for the trip, and talking to them about multiple meaning words. I mean, in the lower grades, we think kids can't handle it, but they can. Like, they're smart. And if we say like a book is just this thing that we read, then they're going to hear the word in sentences and not understand it.
Right.
And a book a reservation, like, what does that mean? Like, that's a verb versus a noun. Is it plural? Is it present tense? Like, we can activate that prior knowledge, what they already know, and then say, oh, we're going to be talking about suffixes. And one that you already know, we just say, like, if I have one of these, what is it? Book. What if I had more than one? Books.
Right. Right.
They can already do that. So we're just kind of saying, here's the prior knowledge. Now we can label it. All right. So like, my philosophy is experience and then label.
Right.
Because I get like 4th, 5th grade teachers saying my kids can't write complete sentences. I'm like, that's not true. They just don't understand what you want when you say complete sentence. But if you say you talk in complete sentences all the time, because if I said, what did you do this weekend? They wouldn't go, park, drove, kid, play, went. They're not going to give me these random words and lacking, organization. I mean, it'd be perfect, but they would say, oh my gosh, this weekend my cousins came to visit, and then we all got in the car and we could barely fit, and I'm so excited to see them. And then we went to the park and we played ball all weekend. And they could go on and on and on. Are those complete sentences? Absolutely.
Right.
Right. They may not be the best, depending, right? But they can do that, or we would never understand what they were saying to us.
Right.
And so to me, it's just taking, for teachers, the things that they take for granted and raising their awareness to what kids kind of need. So starting from the get-go is what I think is the most important, and not thinking that kids can't handle it.
Yeah.
Because they really can.
I love this. You're right alongside, same thing that Jen Hasbrook said too. She goes, people are under the misconception that you start in 3rd grade, but you can start in kindergarten with just affixes and understanding that consonant suffix S means more than one. And we use that constantly. I think that's really an important point that you made.
Right. And people say we can't teach them all these alternate spelling things or meaning things. They won't understand it. And I'm like, well, my kids knew that I was mom. Right. And then they knew that I was Jennifer or someone else, and that I was Mrs. Hassard or someone else. It's not like they thought I turned into somebody different when a different name was used. I'm still me. Right. And they were very aware of that. Kids are really perceptive and much smarter than oftentimes we give them credit for being.
I agree.
And it's such an important part of the comprehension process as well, to understand all that
absolutely.
morphology and just your understanding, not only more vocabulary, but just how words work all together and forming sentences. It builds that comprehension. It builds writing skills. It's important.
Yes, it is. It crosses over every realm. So it's morphology can be embedded with decoding. It can be encoding. So like reading and spelling and comprehension and multiple meaning words and grammar. So syntax, semantics, all of it. Because if you say the farmer wouldn't let the kids sleep in the house, that sounds very mean, unless you know that it's a baby goat. And then that makes more sense.
Absolutely.
Right. So when we talk about comprehension, which is still honestly too much of a focus in a lot of the places I'm at, because if they don't have the vocabulary, it doesn't matter how many paragraphs they read and then answer 5 questions. It's not going to help. They need to understand the structure, how to apply it, how to have, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. The farmer in the story sounded really nice the rest of the time. And I don't even remember them mentioning he had children. You know, maybe it means something else, right? Like giving the kids the ability to think more broadly and not in this one-on-one correspondence. But when everything is that finite, they lose cognitive flexibility.
Right. And that inferencing piece is so critical for dyslexic people as well. They really miss that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I actually find that it's not the inferencing that is the problem. It is vocabulary and exposure, right? Like, so many of my dyslexic kids are brilliant.
Yeah.
Right. And orally, they're really can run circles around, lots of other kids who are reading perfectly fine. Right. But when so much of your working memory, which is where you're doing all this, right? Mm-hmm. Like you have to look at capitalization and punctuation and sound everything out and think about the meaning, create images in your mind. I mean, that is a lot going on in there. Right. So if all that is happening, but you're not solid on half of it, and then the full picture isn't going to emerge for you. And that's what you need for comprehension. Mm-hmm. So when I see these kids have to read something 2-3 times, I don't think it's a comprehension problem at all. Because if someone has a comprehension problem, truly a comprehension problem, they could read something 20 times.
Yeah.
And it's not going to make sense.
So you're proposing then the inferencing weakness is not necessarily because that's a skill that they lack for interpreting for comprehension, but rather it's a vocabulary difficulty.
Well, there are a lot of processes that go into comprehension, so I can't say exactly, right? But the thing is that if I read a story out loud and they could understand it and comprehend it, right? Then where's the problem? It's not in the inferencing. It's not in the story. It's not in the understanding of it or the retelling it, right? But all of a sudden I put it in print and we have a comprehension problem. I think too often people think that it's a comprehension issue. Now, we have kids that do have language issues. They might be wonderful readers and it sounds beautiful when they read, but they can't remember anything that they read. They can't put the pieces together. They can't predict what's going to happen next. And that is a whole different issue, right? And so that has to be addressed differently. And to be quite honest, it is much more difficult to address.
I agree.
Right. So when I work on idioms with my dyslexic kids, I mean, they get it. Don't cry over spilt milk. What does that mean? Like when you've heard that, what does that mean? And they're like, they can tell you. But kids who have maybe language deficits from a language processing standpoint, they're like, well, don't cry when your milk spills. And they don't take it any further than that. That's a different issue. And most kindergartners, people think that young kids can't inference. But I'm telling you, they know. They know that I should behave when the principal walks in the classroom. Mm-hmm. They know lots of different things. Like, they know, I mean, my personal children, they knew that they could get root beer for breakfast from my mother, but I wasn't going to give them root beer for breakfast. Like, so they were able to, and this even before kindergarten, they knew which parent to ask if they were more likely to get, I mean, kids know odds.
Yeah.
They know my chances are better with this person or that person, or that's inferencing. And if I walked into one of my kindergarten classrooms and I was soaking wet, I use this example a lot, but if I was soaking wet, they would say, is it raining? And if I go, no, they would say, Are the sprinklers on? No. Did someone squirt you with a hose? No. Like they would go down a logical pathway, right? Like, and if I kept saying no, it would get less likely, but it would be, because I've done it with them before. If I said I was walking in, if I was soaking wet, what would you think? Like, okay, if it wasn't that, what would it be? And they will do that. Oh, did the sink explode on you? Like they pick logical things, right? And the one time I was doing it with a teacher, like kind of showing her, because she really didn't think they could inference. And because someone told her they couldn't, because there was just a disconnect between what somebody I respected, like my college professor or my mentor teacher or somebody told me, and the reality of what they actually see, and the disconnect. And this group of kids, when I kept saying no, this one kid is like, were there aliens on the roof spitting on you?
I like it.
I was like, and I was like, ugh, no. But what if that was the first guess?
Yeah.
We would have had an inferencing problem.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like it would have been, I don't know how that could have happened, or it would have just been a random way out there guess.
Yeah.
And I kept saying no. So granted, he was running out of options. The class was, but
there's a set of inferencing cards that I use with especially my young ones, where I tell a story and there's a picture on the front. And for example, I'll say, how do you think the boy got the purple paint on his shirt? And he's painting a picture, and some of those paints are spilling over, and they can infer just from that picture, oh, because the paint spilled over. And just little things like that that we take for granted is a big deal when it comes to inference.
Right. Yeah. But that is not, looking at a picture, you don't need to be able to decode to do that. Right. So when you're testing some of these things, we don't do a lot of the correct measures, because we'll say they missed all the inferencing questions in the story, but they were required to read it. So I don't really feel too confident with that. So when I do assessments, I make sure I always have a listening comprehension assessment.
Yeah.
And I compare it to my reading comprehension assessment, because I will also have kids that are just really smart and they read terribly. But because they are so smart or have a lot of background knowledge, I've actually had them where they're reading the text aloud and I'm listening. It doesn't even sound like English.
Right.
Like I don't even know what they're reading. And I've had to look at what they're reading and look at my copy and make sure they're on the right thing. And I didn't give them like some language I don't understand. And they will still get 4 out of 5 comprehension questions right.
You must be talking about the GORT, because I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and there's And I think that's important to know. So I use the GORT because I can tell a lot of things about the way they read, but the questions they answered. Then I do listening comprehension, and I can tell a lot by which questions they can answer and which questions they can't. Some of the questions are inferential, like why do you think he took his car to go shopping?
Right.
When he could have walked, right? Like, well, inferencing would be too much to carry, or the items are too big, or all these things, right? And if they're like, well, he liked his car. Well, that's not a good answer, right? Because he might have liked his car, but if that wasn't in the story and he was going to talking to get things, then that's an inferencing issue. There's like a test I use, but it's just how many eggs were in the nest in the story. Yeah. And I'll have kids who are like 2, 3, 4. Right. Those are reasonable numbers, right? They're reasonable numbers for eggs in a nest, which means they know basically about birds and eggs and how many they can hatch in a nest. But they don't remember. Yeah. Right. So then I'll start looking at what's our short-term memory like. Maybe it's the detail things that are missing, but the big picture things are solid. Well, that lets you know how much repetition you're going to need to do. And a lot of the things that when we want to go in and target, what is the real root of the problem? Yeah. Because we're doing things, if a kid is having trouble hiking and we give him like the best hiking pants and the best equipment and a all the best canteens and things like that, but he's walking in 4-inch heels. Yeah. It's not going to get any better. That hiking's still going to, I keep twisting my ankle, but you have the best hiking pants they make. Yeah. It's not, it's just going to
I've told this story before. I think I told it to Dr. Mather or somebody, but I remember doing the GORT and that story about the cat Mimi that they all say my, right? And so the cat Mimi was in the tree, and one of the question is, what's the name of the cat? That's the question. What's the name of the cat? And she goes, Shirley. And I was like, I've never had anybody tell me Shirley before. And I was like, how in the world did she come up with Shirley? And somebody goes, I bet she calls her grandma Mimi. And Mimi's real name is Shirley. I was like, oh my gosh, that's that background information. She's using her real life. And yeah, I guess that would have made sense in her life.
But see, that's the thing is like, I mean, you know, we're like-minded, the three of us, right? So it's like, we're always thinking, why did that answer come about? Not like, wow, this is ridiculous. Right. This kid's got issues, right? But if you're really paying attention as an educator and saying, why did that answer come out of their mouth? What might have caused that? What do I need to look at differently? Then I think that's important. Like, how many eggs were in the nest? 2, 3, 4? I think you pretty much know about birds. And you just forgot what the number is, right? But if you're like 742, I'm just like, oh my goodness, that poor bird. You know,
that's funny.
You know, so then you're saying, okay, well, we don't even have background knowledge. We picked a number randomly, and that's all. Honestly, why when I do diagnostics, the answers are more important to me than the score,
right? Because
you have so many kids who could score exactly the same. That's a little bit of my apprehension about all these online assessments where you don't know what happened and why.
Right.
And because if I can't like hear these things and know which response, some kids might get a standard score of 100 and they got 10 in a row correct. And then they got 5 wrong or whatever the ceiling is, right? Now you have another kid who got 10 right, but it was right, wrong, right, wrong, right, wrong, you know, like all the way down. They still got 10 right, but they got much further in the list. And they had these more advanced things correct. The other kid, they're going to score exactly the same. But the first one is more solid up to a certain point, right? The other kid, we're like, why do we have these gaps, right? What patterns do we see that might be similar on another assessment? And is this profile repeating itself? But it's more about the error analysis than it is just a score. Now, I know we need scores. I do think we overtest, but good, solid testing is great for guiding and also holding you accountable so that you know, like, what's happening with the child and an objective measure so that it's not, I feel like they're improving, but really not. Especially for people like, especially diagnosticians or you know, psychologists that go from a 5-year-old to a 10-year-old to a 15-year-old, like it's hard to keep your perspective.
Right.
But to be able to look at what types of errors you're seeing. And when I sit down with parents, I'll say, well, we had 10 errors on this passage, but if you'll notice, these are good errors. And a parent will say, like, good errors? And it's an error. And I'm like, well, there are good errors and there are harder errors, right? And so I just kind of say, like, would you rather them be shoplifting, which is an error, or a serial killer? maybe not that example, but there's a big difference between, we can say, oh, error, but very different type of error.
Yeah.
Are they all the same error? Can we see the root of it? Is it something we can go back and kind of fill in, you know, fairly easily? Is it going to be something that requires a lot more work? And I think that's really an important thing for therapists, reading therapists, educators to understand, to want to see the errors and to understand how to interpret it.
So I love that. This concludes part 1 of our interview with Jennifer Hasser. Join us next week as we resume our discussion with her. The Dyslexia Duo podcast hosts are Amy Rodenroth,
Melissa Dean.
Our producer is Greg Rodenroth.
You can find us on Facebook at The Dyslexia Duo.
Email us any questions or comments at thedyslexiaduo@gmail.com.
Awareness is so important. Share this podcast with your friends,
family,
and teachers.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.